Okay, on this CD we're going to talk about cognitive behavioral therapies. The cognitive behavioral models, and there are several of them which I have the authors listed up on the board, and we'll get to in a minute, but if you were to do an actuarial or empirical study around planet Earth in the year 2004, 2000, 1995, for at least the last decade, if not 2 decades, in terms of simply asking the question, which is the most widely used therapy approach in the world to cope with mental health issues? The odds are very great that the answer to that question has been for quite some time the cognitive models. These began back in the early 1960s, became very popular in the late 60s and 70s, and have pretty much taken off like wildfire. The early founders, and Aaron Beck, as listed up there, is credited as being one of probably the 2 classic pioneers of the cognitive movement. The other is Albert Ellis, and I have REBT after his name. REBT stands for Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, and if you read anything published in the early 90s and previously, rather than seeing REBT, you'll see RET, or Rational Emotive Therapy. They're similar in many ways, different in a few, similar in many ways, but both of them really focus on this idea of thinking, influencing behavior, influencing emotions. And both of the authors, when they first started in the field, and both Aaron Beck and Al Ellis were clinicians. Beck was working at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School at the hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Ellis was a private practitioner working in New York City, and I think both may still be there today. Both noticed, particularly among clients who were depressed, and Beck did a lot of his work on a unit with people who were very seriously depressed, that if you listened to people talk, there was definite commonality among the self-talk or the things that people with depression would say that reflected their thinking. And this kind of tended to have certain commonalities, certain patterns to it. But the overall flavor of the thinking or the thoughts or the self-talk of people who were experiencing depression was that it was very negative. And so both Beck and Ellis, in 2 cities, not terribly far apart from one another, but in 2 cities, at about the same point in time, both of them also, again, sort of frustrated by psychoanalysis and its seeming inability to really kind of touch on the main issues that clients were experiencing. Both of them noticed this kind of self-talk, these thinking errors or so forth, as they started calling them, and that there was just this pervasive negativity, and they thought, well, I wonder if maybe a helpful way of helping people overcome depression might be to look at their thoughts, to look at their thinking, to look at their self-talk, and try to help them develop ways to change it into something which is not so punitive, which is not so negative. And so cognitive therapy really was founded and started working with clients with depression. Now, if you follow the early writings into later literature, you'll find that through the 80s, as CBT was applied to a lot of people with depression, that books start coming out, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy 4. And then you can fill in things other than depression. So they started trying to broaden the approach to apply to different populations. And you can now read cognitive therapy books for adolescents, cognitive therapy books for couples. You can read cognitive behavioral therapy for people with personality disorders. You can read it for post-traumatic stress disorder. You can read it for crisis intervention. Those of you who've taken Randy's crisis class, the book is, I think, edited by Arthur Freeman, and it's cognitive behavioral approaches to many different crisis situations. So that the state of where we are now is that CBT has been applied to the vast majority of psychological mental health issues even touching on the edges of psychosis, but not quite fully delving into the kind of psychotic thought process, which most mental health people see as just kind of a horse of a slightly different color or of a very different color from kind of neurotic or personality types of issues. But nonetheless, so it began in work with depression and has just become very, very broad. Another important thing about CBT is that, as I think I may have talked about in the very first tape that I made, if you look empirically at what the outcome research says, CBT therapists tend to be more research-oriented than therapists of many of the other theoretical orientations that we cover in this class. They come in part trained as scientists. The behavioral component of CBT, behaviors come right out of the laboratory and then started applying some of what worked on rats and pigeons and so forth in labs to humans and mental health treatment centers. But there's a lot of research that's been done, and so there have been several very wide-scale studies done on cognitive behavioral and how it works for depression, and the National Institute of Mental Health funded a huge study at multi-sites throughout the United States comparing the efficacy of CBT to antidepressant medications. In general, when CBT is compared to antidepressants, what research seems to say is that it is, on average, at least as effective as antidepressants, and sometimes is preferable in that it works more quickly, because antidepressants take 2 weeks to kick in and about 6 weeks to get up to full speed, whereas CBT can kick in right after the first session, and you can front load your sessions if someone is at an extreme crisis point so that you have several sessions a week. So most research seems to say it's at least as effective as sort of other competing models, and in many cases it seems to be more effective. So it's a model which has been sort of tested in the field. There's a lot of credible scientific evidence saying that it works for a whole host of things, depression among them, but not only limited to depression. It is also a fairly short-term model. It's very definitely kind of issue-focused, so that if we look at humanistic models and we look at psychodynamic models where they're trying to kind of change the whole person, cognitive behavioral models are more a client comes in with a specific area of concern, and the therapy will focus on that specific area. Now, if that turns into the client starts talking about other areas of concern, you can broaden what you're doing. But the goal is usually kind of focused, maybe symptom focused or issue focused, as compared to psychoanalysis or the psychodynamic models where it's really kind of trying to change the whole person, or a humanistic model where it's kind of grow and self-actualize. So this is much more kind of a tighter model, which also means that research may have an easier time finding results, because it's easier to find results when you're fine-tuned than when the world is out there. As I said, Aaron Beck is credited as the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy. Al Ellis is credited as the founder of rational emotive behavioral therapy. The CBT and REBT are similar in many ways. In some ways they're different. There's a chapter on each in the text, and you can read for the finer distinctions among the theories. A bigger distinction is just in terms of personality. Beck is kind of a professional, sort of just everyman, or more like an everyman kind of guy. And Ellis is just a card. He is a real character. He is in your face. He is confrontational. When he was younger, he would curse a mile a minute. Now he curses, I don't know, a mile every 10 minutes or something like that. But he's a real colorful guy. Some people love him and some people hate him. Beck is just less flamboyant. Don Meichenbaum and Arthur Freeman are also big names in the cognitive field, and have done publishing and lots of publishing, research, editing, and so forth of articles. The main kind of idea behind the cognitive component of cognitive behavioral therapy is this notion that it's not so much what happens to us in our lives that leads to our reactions, as it is our perception. Your perception, your interpretation, the way that you view things, that influences your thoughts and feelings. So it's not so much what goes on, but what I tell myself about what goes on, what I tell myself about the meaning of that, what I tell myself how I interpret that situation. And I have certainly seen this in my life, in my personal life, in lives of friends, and lives of clients, where two people can be in the very same situation and walk out with very different experiences because they come with different expectations, or because they perceived it differently based on their past or based on the way that they tend to view the world. An experience I often use in my CBT classes: imagine that you're married, you come home from work one day, if you have children, your spouse has taken your children off to a babysitter, a friend, grandparent's house. You walk in, you smell delicious food cooking, you look at your table is set with a white linen tablecloth, and there's roses there, and there's wonderful fancy china, and you look at this, and you say to yourself, now, if I have a classroom of 20 people, I will have very different reactions to what people say. Some people think, oh, how wonderful. Other people will walk into the exact same situation, they'll look, and they'll become furious. Now, why would coming home, the kids are at grandma's house, there's a lovely table set, beautiful, delicious smelling meal, simmering on the stove, this beautiful setting. Why is it that this would make someone furious instead of very happy? Well, if you talk with a person who's like, oh, this is lovely, and you say, what were you saying to yourself about the situation? Look what he or she has done for me. I must really be loved. What a wonderful spouse I have. We're going to have such a special night together. The person who comes in and is furious says, oh my goodness, look at this. Something is terrible. He wrecked the car. He destroyed the house. She's going to tell me she's having an affair. Something awful has happened. Oh, I am so angry. Now the situation is identical. It's what people have told themselves about the meaning of this situation that is different. The situation has not changed a bit. And that's where the real kind of heart of CBT is it's helping people appreciate that it's not only what happens, but it's what they do with what happens. Another sort of real life clinical example that I found very powerful in terms of thinking about the cognitive approach is I've worked with many clients who've been seriously traumatized, oftentimes in their childhood and physically and sexually abusive situations. And sometimes they'll say, as they're sitting in therapy talking in either a group or talking individually, they'll say, what good does it do to talk about all this stuff, to just dredge it up and rehash it, when you and I cannot get in a time machine, go back in time, and undo the crud that's happened? Well, that's true. We can't go back and undo the horrible events that have influenced many of the lives of our clients. But what you can say to your client is, we can't change what happened, but what we can work on in therapy is the way that you view that, is what you tell yourself about yourself, what you tell yourself about the world, how you view others. That's what you can change. So you can't change the fact that you were abused, but you can change the fact that you say, because of this, I'm a rotten person. I must have done something to deserve it. There's something about me which is bad, so bad things keep happening. And that's where, again, the power of cognition, it's not so much what happened. Now, guaranteed, it is some of what happened. Some people have really horribly traumatic lives, and you have to appreciate that. But what they do with that, that's where the power of therapy is how you help clients sort of rewrite their story. The narrative therapies are rewrite your story. So cognitive is how do you look back on that with a different set of glasses. In a film that I show in class in cognitive, Arthur Freeman says to the client, now imagine that I gave you a pair of blue colored glasses and I showed you a lemon. What color would the lemon be? And the client says, green. And Freeman says, listen again. I give you a pair of blue lenses and I show you a lemon. What color is the lemon? And the client says, well, green. Freeman kind of looks at him and says, well, yellow and blue makes green, so the lemon would be green. And then the therapist says, just because the lemon looks green doesn't mean the lemon is green. the lemon is still yellow. I think that's a lovely little story. Again, going back to this idea of perception. So, that's sort of the theory, that's the rationale of CBT. How is it that people do this stuff? Well, part of what we do is we help people become aware of their thinking. And much of their thinking falls into what the cognitive folks call automatic thoughts. Your automatic thoughts are the stream of consciousness that in some people seems to be perpetual, every waking moment, there's some sort of thought spinning around or self-talk spinning around in your head. Other people claim that their brains are a little bit more quiet, but still the thoughts pop in and pop out and pop in and pop out. These generally are called automatic thoughts, and the cognitive folks call them that because they're automatic. They seemingly come out of nowhere. So you're walking down the street and you see something and a thought pops into your head, and then someone says something and a thought pops into your head, and then you do something and a thought pops into your head. If you're not aware of your thinking, it's hard to change it. So one of the things that CBT does is helps people sort of become aware of their thinking. It's to raise people's awareness. And there's a variety of different ways that the CBT therapists do this. One is just in sessions. You talk with clients about their thinking. You say things to clients like, well, yesterday when you were home having that argument with your spouse, I'm wondering what kind of thoughts were going through your head. Or as you and your girlfriend were arguing over where to go on vacation, what were you thinking about? Those are ways to raise awareness. CBT is a model which has, if clients are willing to do it, a lot of homework in it. And homework is assignments that people do in between sessions to help sort of speed therapy along and to help integrate real life with the treatment process. So what often therapists will do is have clients carry along what sometimes gets called a DTR, or a daily thought record. And a DTR is just a piece of paper that people will carry where they write down a situation, they write down what their thought was, and they write down their reaction. So you have situation, thought, and reaction. And you just log. And some people will log every thought they have. That can get really tedious very quickly. Oftentimes, therapists will say, at the end of the day, or as you notice a situation where your mood changes noticeably, log that. So, life is going on, and then I walked into work and my boss said, Heather, can I see you before you go home today? Situation, walked into work and Wilma said, Heather, can I see you before you go home today? Reaction was, so instant panic, blood pressure jumps up, start to worry. Why is that? Is it because Wilma Hepker is a scary, fearsome person? It probably isn't. It's probably because I had a thought. And the thought was, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. She's going to talk to me about this. What have I done? Is she going to fire me? Or whatever other thoughts it is that people generate when their boss says, I need to see you later on today. So you have people chart this. It's a way of helping them become aware of what their automatic thinking is.